Hey yo, this is Cece from Pressure Boys, the best smoke on the East Coast, and you're watching the WARR Multiverse. Sheesh!
Lace my Tim's, metaverse in sight, parallel dimensions. Gonna grind all night, flip reality, stack 'em high, skyscrapers, universe, shuffle stats, grow, no capers. Work spreads like rumors in back alleys, productivity floods, tsunami in the valleys. Clock ticks fast, but I move faster. Multiverse master, chaos turn chapter. Black world, hustle in another. Time split, sound waves echo like thunder. Infinite fields where I nurture my flow. Seeds of today's grind, tomorrow they grow. Warp script, switch realms, jobs never done. Late 90s vibe under neon sun. Digital bridges, I cross them no toll. Quantum leap, gotta meet that goal. Satellites orbit, bring signals of success. Each timeline hit like a well-aimed chest. Metaverse mobile, no 9 to 5 jive. Twist fate's tail, make every path thrive. Black world, hustle in another. Time split, sound waves echo like thunder. Infinite fields where I nurture my flow. Seeds of today's grind, tomorrow they grow. Lace my Tim's, metaverse in sight. Parallel dimensions, gonna grind all night. Flip realities, stack 'em high, skyscrapers. Universe shuffle, stats grow, no capers. Work spreads like rumors in back alleys. Productivity floods, tsunami in the valleys. Clock ticks fast, but I move faster. Multiverse master, chaos turn chapters. Grind in one world, hustle in another. Time split, sound waves echo like thunder.
Oh yeah!
Infinite fields where I nurture my flow. Seeds of today's grind, tomorrow they grow. Warp script, switch realms, jobs never done. Late 90s vibe under neon sun. Digital bridges, I cross them no toll. Quantum leap, gotta meet that goal. Satellites orbit, bring signals of success. Each timeline hit like a well-aimed chest. Metaverse mogul, no 9 to 5 jive. Twist fate's tail, make every path thrive. Grind in one world, hustle in another. Time split, sound waves echo like thunder. Infinite fields where I nurture my flow. Seeds of today's grind, tomorrow they grow.
All right. What a wonderful day. You know, every day has been wonderful. I've been working like a savage. Everybody else has been working like a savage. Today has just been fantastic. Thanks to everybody who joined me Thursday. That was a lot of fun. We were chilling, having a good time with the homies, and chat, and food. And then today we're having a wonderful conversation. Today we're talking about time traveling gods. Oh, it froze. Gods. Time traveling gods. There we go. We got it the third time. We got it right the third time. You know, today's going to be a fun episode. I had thought about this a little while ago, and I thought, how would I end up talking about this? All of these ideas, and I said, well, let me do it in a podcast episode, and let me do it in an open-ended sort of way. I mean, we don't have any definitive proof. You know, if there were definitive proof, there would be no need for my show and other shows because aliens would be here and they would be real and the gods would be real and all of that would be the truth of that would be out. So why would I be here trying to tell you the truth? So it's going to be an open-ended sort of discussion. One of the main things, I was watching an older episode of Ancient Aliens, like last week, the week before. Time does not exist for me at all. If I didn't like have this on the schedule and like as a set thing every Saturday, I don't know if I would even like, oh my god, time does not exist. Like, and I've just been working so much that time literally doesn't exist except for just like work and sleep, which like I don't even sleep. So like work. um, so so I was talking. I was watching this older episode, and they were talking about the time travelers and how there's this theory out there that some of the people, um, some of the people who are coming back now, who we perceive as extraterrestrials, may actually be human beings from the distant future. The theory is that something happened in the future and they had to figure out a way to come back in time and experiment on us genetically in order to make us better and able to sustain the whatever cataclysm or something that was happening. And the reason why the extraterrestrials look like shriveled up grays is because the human beings live in space. So their bodies and muscles have atrophied. So that's why they look like grays, and instead of and like no muscular bodies. I don't know how true all of that is. To me, it goes back to one of the fanciful um, sort of accounts of the way that people describe, oh, they're here for our benefit. They love us. They're here. We're all gonna sing kumbaya. We're all gonna dance around and hug and say welcome. Like, come on, get real. It's definitely not gonna happen. Nobody's gonna sing kumbaya and say welcome. All right, the extraterrestrials come here and they're like, bow down to your lord. Okay, we are infinitely more powerful and your creator. So like, there's no way. If they created us, that would be an answer. That would be the only reason why they would do anything for our benefit, is because they want to see our progression going on. So if they were to do something like that, the problem is it's all just fanciful notions. It's like, what if, the sun started dancing around and flying through the sky in circular patterns? And what if, all of this happens and it's just speculation? What if I walk down the street and get struck by lightning by 3 separate lightning bolts in the same spot? I mean, it's just as likely as that happening as them being here for our benefit. Even if they created us, what they would perceive as being for our benefit and what we would perceive as being for our benefit is 2 different things. Because if they created us, they had a plan, they had a scheme, they had some sort of thing going on, and they're 1,000, 2,000 million years more advanced than us. So they would have the idea that they would come in and they would say, we know these sort of truths because we're 1,000 years more advanced than you, and so our science and physics and mathematics and way we perceive justice and right and wrong is more advanced because we're more advanced than you. And so, whatever your argument is of why we shouldn't be doing this experiment on you means squadul, because a laboratory scientist does not ask the rat for permission before it experiments on it. It just takes the rat and experiments on it. I mean, if you wanted any proof, really look at all the cattle mutilations and animal mutilations and stuff like that. Because what you see is surgical cuts and surgical things happening. So, and smooth cuts and specific organs being removed and all things like that. And that would be proof that they would be using us or anything that they wanted as a sort of laboratory. Because if they did that, then it would mean that they needed some sort of genetic thing to make some sort of, disease, virus, antibodies, a cloning machine, possibly. It could be a whole number of things, depending on what their science is like. They could be using genetic material for a whole list of things. So it's not out of the realm of plausibility if you look into something like that. So I was sitting there watching this thing, and I'm just like, man, this is all fanciful, for all the reasons I just listed out. It's a wonderful concept. Sure, they're here for us. They love us. All these great things. Blah, blah, blah. Bruh. Let me tell you. If they were coming back here from the future, it would be for their benefit too. Because something happened to them in the future that didn't happen to us yet, that we don't know about, that hurt them, destroyed them, whatever, and they needed to find some remedy to fix that. And so from their perspective, the remedy to fix that was to come back in time and change everything. And I was sitting there, and I was like, I'm tired of watching this right now, because this is all fanciful. Even if it's a few ideas and whatever could be true, I've seen enough of this right now. I need to watch something else, I need to physically watch something else. So I switch over, and I'm like, I don't know, let me put on the news, I guess. So I put on the news, and I'm sitting there watching it, and I realize, they're talking about tariffs and trade negotiations, and then other countries negotiating with each other about trade and all these other things. And I was like, word, that's cool. I'm seeing all these things. As an economist, I understand the importance of tariffs, negotiation, trade. I also understand that there needs to be a drawing line. You see, there's some sort of, not drawing a line in between it. What the hell was that notification? Hold up. Putin declares Easter truce. Okay, great. See, we were just talking about drawing a line. Look at that. Everybody's got to take a break for Easter. All right, which is tomorrow. Everybody's got to take a break. We got to draw the line right here, take a break for Easter. That's what we're doing tomorrow, all the way until Monday. You see, all these other countries out there are doing all these different things. Negotiating with each other, making truces, fighting with each other, trying to take over each other's territory. And I realized A few months ago, I had an interesting thought. I said, what if all these imaginary scenarios I've created in my brain of things, that I've either thought about or whatever, how I would do something. What if, when I fully imagined it as like a real world, what if what I was actually doing was viewing another dimension through my own consciousness? Just let that settle into you for a second. What if, through my own imagination, I was viewing another dimension? Think about that for a second. Now, you immediately say, oh, come on, that's fanciful. True. I totally agree with you. In fact, I totally agreed with you up until I was sitting there watching this combination of ancient alien theory and current events. And I was sitting there watching all of it together, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, this reminds me of that vision I had of an alternate dimension combining with another dimension, where two of me existed in one universe. Two different versions of me. And how did the world go? What was all the plans? How did the political structure change? All of these I thought about in my vision, years ago. And I don't mean a vision like I was sitting there and I had some sort of crystalline vision from a ball. I mean, I was probably just sitting there imagining. But I call it a vision now. Before I called it imagination. I'm calling it a vision now. Because I was sitting there thinking about all this combination of things. And I was saying, this is exactly the beginnings of what I was thinking about. How the world power structure would change, how things would happen, but how it would happen forcefully. Remember, I didn't think about any of these things because I, wanted them to happen on their own. I thought about these things because I wanted there to be a change in the world. So everything that would happen in my quote-unquote vision would have been done by basically dictatorial force. I mean, I am a god of war after all. I don't know about you, but that doesn't spell democracy to me. That spells dictatorship. So, that's the way it is. The problem is I obviously recognize what's wrong with dictatorships, because just because one guy is good doesn't mean that the next guy is going to be good and the next guy is going to be good and all of that. So obviously there's an inherent problem there. But you let people go in democracies and all they end up doing is arguing and debating and wasting time for all of this, I mean, think about how Wernher von Braun thought about how we could bring people into into space in 1960s, how we could be traveling through space interdimensionally with artificial gravity craft. I mean that was so long ago, and yet where are we doing that? We're not doing it anywhere, at least not in the public view. So what happens there? So I was sitting there looking at it, and I was like, man, some of these things that are happening right now are part of my plans that I made in this vision of imagination that I was imagining, which now became a vision. And then I said, What if we live in a world where not it's not just time traveling, but it's interdimensional traveling? Now, I thought about this and I said, hold your horses. I said, well, why would this happen? And what would be the perspective? Because remember, if it's my plans, it's my thoughts. So it's my perspective, my wants, not yours, mine. Just like how if they were interdimensional gods or extraterrestrials, their plans for us are not necessarily our plans that we would want. My plans are not necessarily your plans that you would want. It's the same concept. Everything's from that individual person's perspective or that group of society's perspective. So if I were to be the one coming back, I said, well, why would I do all these things? What would I do to ensure that that dimensional vision that I had came into existence? What would I do about that? Well, the first thing I would do is ensure that certain things happened that were permanent to cause a certain turn of events to begin to happen. I would need to develop some sort of traveling technology, some sort of other thing, and I would also need to I would also need to do things to the alternate version of myself in order to do all these, in order to ensure that a certain turn of events continues to happen in the universe in that time frame. Maybe it's not the aliens who broke my back. Maybe it was me. Think about it. If I wanted to ensure that I myself became immortal, just like I was supposed to be, immortal as in the definition of not constrained by metabolic processes and the moments of time. It does not mean infallible. Remember, we go upon this at all. You can still be killed. Just that means that you're not restricted to the laws of time and death in that sort of frame. Wouldn't then I want to ensure that something like that happened? Well, think about it this way. If my back never hurt, I probably never would have done a lot of the things I've done in the past over a decade. I probably would be doing so many different things. My life would probably be so different. But is that necessarily a good thing? Maybe. Maybe for me as a person, because my fucking back wouldn't fucking hurt. But what about for a society? What about for the other version who came over here, the interdimensional version? From their perspective, having me be immortal would be awesome. Be a great help for a plethora of reasons. So that could be one of the things. Because it would be for their benefit, not necessarily my benefit. Because everything fucking hurts. Every fucking day, all day long, everything hurts. So, obviously I would want that to not hurt. You know? So that would be beneficial from my perspective. But from the other guy's perspective, having me be in pain all the time is a small sacrifice for the greater good of whatever their cause is. So I thought about it and I said, well, again, this is an imagination, a vision without confirmation. So again, we have to take it from that perspective as well. This isn't necessarily confirmed, nor do I fully believe that this is exactly what's happening. But we need to explore all topics. Because then, by just having this little vision and this little connection of different ideas in the world and current events, I was able to think about it differently. And I was able to think about how the idea of the time travelers and time traveling gods may be plausible. For example, we're sitting there, and what if they did come? Obviously, like I said, it wouldn't be for our benefit. It would be for their perspective, their benefit, their whole thing. Let's just get past that, okay? It's not going to be kumbaya, everybody giving a hug and drinking some warm cocoa. It's not happening. So they go and they come here, they come back. Let's explore the idea first that it's humans who came back here and decided to do some sort of things. Well, let's first start with this. Why only come back here? Why not go back to ancient Egypt? Why not go back to ancient Rome? Why not travel back 15,000 years and find out for the truth if there was really a civilization before the Great Flood? We know we have some evidence, some destroyed cities like Göbekli Tepe and other things. So what if there was? Like the city of Dwarka that was found underwater in India. What if there was some sort of civilization? Well, all those civilizations are talking about when the extraterrestrial alien gods were here. But what's funny is especially in Judaism and Christianity, if you look back, and Islam, if you look back at their descriptions of the gods, even the Norse and the Greeks and Odin and the Vikings and all of those gods, Woden, all of them were depicted as human-like. Why would that be the case? Well, if they're time-traveling humans from the future coming back, they would still look like humans, right? Because they're humans. Now, ancient alien theorists have also theorized that they may be extraterrestrials from another planet, but they bear a similar genetic marker to us, maybe even some sort of common ancestry, and so they look like bipeds. They have 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, 2 eyes, a nose, and a mouth, and that's the way they look. And so they may not be human, but they're humanoid, so. But it's interesting is because if you look into the Bible, a lot of these beings, especially in the old books, a lot of these beings look almost exactly human, which is interesting. And one of the rabbis who's always on, or pastor who's always on Ancient Aliens says, thought about this too, realized this too. Lot is standing there when they're gonna destroy the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, and the 2 angels come in, and Lot meets up with them, and he sees them, and he immediately gets down on his knees and bows down to them and says, "My lords," which is so interesting, because right before they described as looking like everybody else. So how would he know, for example, that these beings were gods, angels, whatever, and not necessarily humans, and how would he know to immediately go up to them and bow down to them if they look exactly like a regular guy? I mean, that makes no sense. Think about it. If he looked like a regular guy, why would he run up and bow to them? Obviously, he didn't look like a regular, they didn't look like regular guys. They looked almost like regular people. And you see these descriptions all across the world. The Greeks are very famous for putting, horns on their heads. Same thing with the Irish and the Celts and the Druids. They drew their gods with horns on their heads. So it may be possible that these beings looked almost human, but they had some sort of difference from them, and this is how you knew that they were the gods. So these beings would come here, and they were the gods, and they would walk around and look exactly like us, and yet we knew to worship them because they were the gods. They looked only slightly different from us. Why would they look slightly different? Well, they would look different from a plethora of things. In the 70s, a few scientists used their for lack of a better term, I guess, their advanced technology for the time to try and predict what human beings would look like in in the future after. And one of the things that they did was, well, what if they went underground, and they looked like these giant ant beings. Our eyes became larger and blacker, so we were able to absorb more light in the darkness. Our heads became bigger because we were intelligent. Our bodies became spindlier, so that we could, move around in tighter spaces and whatever. And then they did the opposite. What if they went up into space? And well, what you got was a almost gray-looking being. You had a being with big eyes and a giant head and a tiny body because the body had atrophied, the muscles had atrophied because they were up in space for so long. And what's interesting is if you look at modern science, studying of our current astronauts who go into space, they realize that even though the scientists do all these exercises in space to keep their muscles moving and growing and firm and strong and all of that, it's not enough. You pretty much have to work out almost all the time if you're going to keep your muscles from atrophying, which is impossible because you need to navigate through space, fly a spaceship, make sure you don't hit any asteroids, make sure you're going to good. Sometimes if you're traveling millions of light years, you may need to have an automated system that can do all those things and wake you up if there's an emergency, because you might have to go into some sort of cryo sleep because you can't survive a million light years away. You can all, so you have to go into cryo sleep for the next almost million years. And so you got to fly through space for a million years in cryo sleep. I mean, this ain't easy. So some people might not want to do that. They might know how to live forever, but they just can't, their physical beings, their physical bodies can't, keep up with the space. They didn't have any gravity or something like that, who knows? And then your skin tans and turns to gray because your sun exposure and all of that is different and whatever. So they did all these studies and these different ideas and thought concepts, which I thought was so interesting because they look like the Greys and they look like the ant beings from the Hopi descriptions, the ones underground. And is it possible that they were these beings from the future or from another dimension? Maybe these ant beings were ant beings from, they're humans from another version of Earth. Maybe this version of Earth got destroyed by a cataclysm and they went back and came over here. So you got to remember, just because they travel through dimensions, don't mean that they also don't travel through time. There could be a number of things. First of all, the planet could be knocked off of its rotation, or of its revolution could be changed, and both of those things would change our planet's measurement of time. Something could happen to the sun, same thing, would change our measurement of time, bring it closer to home. Just because they leave their planet in the year 4000 AD and then they step through a portal doesn't mean that it's not the year 500 BC over here. Meaning it's not necessarily a one-to-one relationship. Just because, and then you have to remember that their measurement of time may not necessarily be our measurement of time. Maybe their mathematics differs in some sort of digits or whatever. They use some sort of different calculations or a whole number of things, right? Maybe that's what happens for them. So what they do is they maybe they have the ability to travel through time, but then they put in the coordinates and it gets over here and it's 1952. So they thought that they'd land in the United States in 2034, and they really get here and it's 1952. So a whole number of things could happen. Just because they're dimensional travelers does not mean they're not also time travelers. Yeah, I appreciate y'all with those retweets of the show. I like that. Just because they travel through time doesn't mean that they don't travel through dimensions also, and vice versa. In fact, they probably go hand in hand. And when these beings come over here and their technology is more advanced, maybe because of medication or their natural course of life or both, their lifespan is different, and so we perceive them as gods. So they come over here, we look at them, they're extraterrestrials, they're gods, they're all these things, and they would come here, and why wouldn't they want us to view them as extraterrestrial gods, as ultimate, gods of the universe? Of course they would want us to view them as that. Why? Because we would do the same freaking thing. There's no way you're going to tell me that somebody's going to bow down at your knees and throw a bunch of gold at you and throw you a feast, and you're going to say, actually, stop cooking, stop bringing your hoards of gold to me. I'm not really a god. I'm just a... No, you're going to fucking take your hoards of fucking gold. I mean, gold is gold. If you had a way to bring it back with you, your gold would be the value of the gold by you, and then, oh my God, I need a sip of water. Hold on, chat. And, so why wouldn't it be the same? Another... So we've talked about the idea of them coming in to help us from the future. But again, it would be from their perspective, of the future. It wouldn't be from our perspective of what we need now in the future. For example, everybody who grew up in the 50s and 60s and 70s, all thought that by the year 2020 we'd have flying cars, we'd have robots in our houses, we'd have all these things. I mean, if you look at like the Jetsons, that takes place like now, and look at us. We don't have flying cars. We're just now getting electric vehicles, something that Nikola Tesla thought of himself in the 1910s. So, I talked about in previous episodes how Nikola Tesla put his own electric motor inside, what was it, a Pierce Arrow, and drove up to 90 miles an hour. Drove all around, showing everybody what was going on. I mean, this is what was it, like 1915 or something like that? I forget. Anyway, you could look it up. Anyway, he did this then. I mean, why are we just getting it now? Again, 100 years later, we're just getting to the point of when we have usable electric vehicles, and we're just now getting reusable space travel equipment. We're just now getting AI and autonomous vehicles and autonomous military craft and all things like that. It's so ridiculous. I mean, now I want coffee. Coffee's great. All right, that was the last of the coffee. So, we're just now getting all these things, and then it's almost, then what do we gotta wait? Another 50 years before we realize, when it's 100 years later after Werner von Braun, that we finally develop his spacecraft idea of travel, with a ship that rotates to give us artificial gravity on the ship. So we don't have to work out 24/7 to keep our bodies from atrophying. I mean, why? Why is this what's happening? Obviously, if they were coming from the future for our benefit, they would be sharing this technology with us. They would be sharing their time travel technology with us. But they don't do that. So obviously, it's not really for our benefit. Okay? So let's draw that conclusion right away. We know it's not for our benefit now. We know that they may be interdimensional as well as time traveling. These time traveling gods may be they may be, just another being. Maybe it's part of their culture. Maybe they're really not from our future, but they're another extraterrestrial race, millions of years more advanced than us, and they travel through time. And they go about, keeping peace and justice and order in the universe by traveling through time or whatever. Maybe it's something like that. Who knows? Because it could be possible. What would you do as a society after your society has existed for 3 million years? Your society exists on 12 different planets. You have the main planet that you came from, and then a bunch of different colony planets. And let's say your society has existed so long that your original solar system that you're from has destroyed itself, and your home planet is gone. You have no home planet anymore, right? Let's say that. Maybe you got there, and not only is your home planet gone, but then you didn't realize that one of the colony planets that you had, their solar system was about to be destroyed and all those people would die. And you didn't have enough time to travel there and warn them of the cataclysm. You didn't have enough time to warn them of the cataclysm. Everybody died on that whole planet. Well, what if you could go and prevent that on other planets? You know, your society has now existed for 5 million years. You have your genetic signature on, you know, let's say 3 dozen planets in the universe so far. You travel from time to time with monitoring forces and peacekeeping forces and all of that between these different places. And you realize that time is what's not on your side. And time is not on your side because it takes time to travel between places. Things happen while you're gone that you have to deal with when you come back. That, you know, the aftermath, or maybe it's been so long that when you left, you're nothing but a distant memory of some gods. Maybe when you came here, you told them the truth. You told the people, hey, you know, we're not gods. We're human beings from another planet. We're your genetic ancestors. You know, we're all these different things. And so we're your genetic ancestors, and you want to come to us and you say, oh, you know, we're just here, and then you leave, right? And you're like, all right, I'll be back in the future. You know, I gotta do some things, and I'll be back, right? And you leave, and because of time distances and differences on planets and gravity, and also the traveling between places as well, because of time differences, you're gone for like a few thousand years. You know, so by the time you get back, you're nothing but a distant memory. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to figure out what happened while you were gone. You're going to probe the alien life, the life on the local life on the planet. You're going to do some experiments. You're going to test the atmosphere, the water, all of these things to make sure it's good for you to have, you know. And for example, you know, you're gonna do all these different things to make sure it's good for you to have, and then you're gonna go and you're gonna embed yourself in the societies of the day, and you're gonna see if they can handle your visit and see if there's something you could do to help them, you know, because this is your mission out there. Now we're exploring the concept of a being or group of beings who would want to do things for our benefit or for their benefit. You know, it would be really, in this scenario, it would be also for their benefit because they wouldn't feel this quote unquote guilty conscience, you know, of not, you know, in this scenario, in this fictional scenario of not having an entire planet destroyed. You know, oh, I gotta crack my back. Oh, it's killing me. So you would look at these, beings, and you would come to the world and to the planet, and you would say, oh, you know, everything has changed, the beings have changed, we need to do some experiments. And so you would take some local livestock, some animals, maybe even some intelligent people, and you'd run some experiments on them. You check their DNA, you check to see if they had any diseases, you know, birth rates, all these different things, and you'd look into it and you'd see, oh, this is you know, this is what's going on, and this is how the world is fared, and can I help? Can I do X, Y, and Z to help them, you know, be more advanced, grow up so that they can protect themselves against, you know, ultimate destruction or whatever. Maybe that's another scenario that could happen. It's possible. Like I theorized before, it's possible that these angels that we see who worship a supreme, almighty God, deity, or whatever, could actually just be extraterrestrials who believed in a God and went out in search of a God and found the proof, and now go out through the universe and preach the word of their God, of the ultimate God of the universe or whatever, because they're the ones who found the proof. It's entirely plausible. You know, think about how many billions of people on the planet are ultra highly religious, or believe in just Christianity alone. I mean, you know, it's entirely plausible that you would go to another planet and all those people would be, the entire planet would be completely religious, because they had a belief and everybody believed it, and then finally proof was found. And so because the proof was found, there was no denying it. So every belief, every person on that planet believes it. The entire society believes it. That would be a unifying event for that society specifically. And so they may come out to be, you know, ultra religious believing society that wants to spread the word. And, you know, these may be what the archangels are, the first angels who come. And this may be why we have a faction and a split among these angels, with the story of Lucifer and other deities from other religious tales. And it's because they are different beings, so they have different frames of thought, different you know, beliefs about the experiments and the things that are going on with their lives. All of these things might be plausible. And these beings would come, and they would, why would time be limited to them? If they had the ability to travel through space at crazy rates or whatever, they might also have the ability to travel through time. And if they had the ability to travel through time and go and um, trying to think of how I should say it. If they had the ability to travel through time, why wouldn't they? You would find evidence of this by the same message that's continually going on. And in fact, this is what we do find. All across the world, a being came down from the sky, taught us civilization, taught us beliefs, taught us religion, taught us about a supreme deity. And even in polytheistic religions, Kush Lethal, yo, good morning, my brother, how you be? Even in polytheistic religions, there's always a supreme deity. Yeah, I understand. Even you know, you have Woden, Odin, Zeus, Jupiter, Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Amaterasu, all of these different gods, Shiva, all of these different gods throughout time. There's one singular, most powerful God, and then the beings who worship that God and spread the word of that God are the ones who polytheistic religions call deities and gods and lesser gods, right? But in our Christian religion world and Western religion tradition, we just call them angels, but it's the same freaking concept. I mean, yo, you hear from Jed at all? What do you mean, like recently? No? And he didn't answer my message the other day, but that's kind of usual for him. But why? Is something going on? Is he okay? Yeah, you got me worried with that message, bro. That's my brother, man. That's your brother. That's my brother. You my brother. Uh, uh, whew. Is everything good? Um, um, so, um, you know, these beings who are coming here and traveling through time may be also religious figures who are coming here with their perspective of what they want you to hear and understand. Because, and this is exactly what we see all the time. We have the human beings have their belief, right? And then the God comes in, the ultimate God or the angels or whatever, and they say, "You've strayed from our beliefs. We need to bring you back in line to the one God." And this has happened all over the planet multiple times. You know, all over the planet, you hear stories of beings who come and say, "Oh, did you forget? Think about just Moses, for example, right here on the screen." You know, Moses comes to the Moses goes down to the people after being up on Mount Sinai for 40 days, and the people are worshiping a golden idol instead of their religious god of the supreme deity. You know, and when Moses comes back from the desert, and for the first time and tries to free the Israelites, there's the story of when he walks among the Israelites and tells them, "I have spoken with God. Did you forget God?" Meaning, you have gotten away from God and strayed from his path and do all these things. Did you forget God's teachings that we came here and taught you the last time? And it's the same thing over and over again. You know, you hear these beings, they come here and they are the same thing. We have, think about in ancient Egypt when you have King Tut's father, right, Akhenaten, right? King Tut's father, Akhenaten, turned the whole religious view of their world upside down. There was no more 10,000 gods. There was one God, the supreme God, Aten, right? The supreme God is the supreme God is the one that you need to follow. You have been following these weird false gods for the past whatever, and now I'm here to bring right to order. Think about in the past, you hear in, for example, in Chinese civilization, you know, you have the Yellow Emperor. He comes in, brings order to society thousands of years ago, teaches everything that happens, whatever, and then says, "All right, listen, bro and broettes, I gotta go. All right, I gotta go over this way to these other people, and I gotta get the hell out of here." And and so you realize, you go, "Oh, I gotta get the hell out of here," and he goes away, and then we go back to worshiping all these other gods. Why is that? Because the teachings remain, but we forget that these weren't all gods. Because you hear the story, this is why ancient alien theorists have such problems with biblical stories. Because in the biblical stories, you read the story of, for example, when God wants to make man, he says, well, let us make him in our image. Well, hold on a second. You're talking about God, a singular being, a fully omnipotent being. How could they be an hour? Well, Christianity explains it today as the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. You know, they're three but also one, three separate concepts, but one being altogether, three separate concepts in one being. So you, in that context, you know, that's how they look at it. But if you think about it, how would you, if you were taught that there's one supreme God, right? Let's say I'm the supreme God, right? And my buddy Jim is behind me, and my other buddy Mike, and my other buddy Phil, and my other buddy Bill, and this girl Jill, okay? Everybody's behind me, right? And I'm sitting here talking and whatever, they're talking, and we're all talking to each other and talking to you, and we're teaching you all these things and whatever. And then it's over, right? And we're gone. Well, you might remember what I said, and you said, oh, that supreme God just told me, and then they said, oh, this, and then you say, well, hold on a second, who's they? And you say, well, there was Jill, and there was Mike, and there was Bill, and then the other person you're talking to says, who's Jill and Mike and Bill? And you say, well, they were gods too. This is how you could have the concept of one God continuously go back into the concept of multiple gods, polytheistic. And the reason why it's so plausible is because you're a group of beings teaching about one singular being. So then they say, the person you're teaching it to later on says, well, who were these other beings? Well, they obviously weren't humans. They were something else. What else is there besides humans? Because we have a singular planetary mind, you would say, well, they weren't monkeys. Although some religions do say that they're animals or animal-like, but let's just say they weren't monkeys, so, and they weren't human, so they must have been gods. And then as time goes on, we don't use the term gods, we use the term angels. It's the same thing, but they're angelic beings instead of extraterrestrial beings. This makes sense is how we would explain extraterrestrial beings as being religious figures of the past. For example, it explains why it's plausible that there could be a Zeus and an Aphrodite and a Hades and all of their retinue, and they all have different abilities and different concepts of life and different understandings and teachings and duties and things to do. It explains why all of that is like that. Because these beings would teach about their singular God that they believe in. They would come here all throughout time because they go back and forth, you know, between their world or another world or their dimension and then back to ours. And as they go to and fro, there's a shift in time. So, like, you know, they might come here every, you know, let's say they send a guy here every 12 hours, right? But every 12 hours might be every 4,000 years for us. So they come here and they teach us their stuff, and then they leave, and then 4,000 years goes by, and all these different beliefs and misconstruing of the stories and the concepts and the histories all begin to happen, and then they come back and they say, whoa, 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 whoa. You got to get back to the course. And this could be the same thing with what happened with Abraham. For example, you hear the Sumerians worship the multiple gods of the Anunnaki, right? The gods who were here in the beginning and taught us everything and gave us society and gave us education and knowledge and gave us language and the ability to communicate with each other, right? They worship the Anunnaki. And then some being comes by and meets up with this really pious, religious, local, well-to-do guy in this little village and says, hey, bro, you and everybody else have been worshiping me wrong, okay? There's not a million gods. There's only one of me, all right? And listen, you got to get away from this land. You got to leave this land of these many gods and go travel to this land, and I'm going to tell you where to go. I promise you that this is the land that you're going to go to, right? And so, misconstrued over time, he says, I promise you this is the land you're going to go to, turns into this is the promised land. Promised to us by who? By God. Well, it's promised to us by God, and God says, oh, well, if it's promised to us by God, it must be ours. It must be divine. It must be real. But maybe from their extraterrestrial perspective, they just didn't want us to believe in those different religions. They said, all right, we're going to start with a small group of people, and these small group of people are going to be the ones who we teach in the first about the singular God. And we're going to start all over again, and because they went back from worshiping the one true God to worshiping a bunch of singular gods, right? And so they go out and they teach these groups, they tell them to leave. And we know that this is true because we know Abraham in the story comes from the city of which was in Sumeria, and Sumer. And so the city of that he comes from in Sumer was a real place because archaeologists have found it now. So, and that was about, about 5,500 years ago, so about 3,000 to 3,500 BC, and so this was all these years ago, which was and so and then it makes sense because we talked about how in the Jewish calendar they count it's about 5,500 or so years right now on their calendar. Makes sense if you're counting from the time that God came down to Abraham and told him that this is what you need to do. You need to get out of here and go find the promised land. And if you're counting down that time, then yeah, it's about 5,500 or so years. And so, the world is could be a whole different thing. Maybe that's exactly what we hear because, you hear, for example, you have Abraham talking to God, making a pact with God, the singular deity, right? And then they go away, and then everybody goes to worshiping the polytheistic gods and starts, also believing in the Egyptian gods or whatever. And about 1,500 years later, they come back and they meet the guy Moses, and they say, Moses, listen, everything's all fucked up, bruh. You're supposed to be worshiping me and only me and not all these other gods. Like, what are you doing? So, listen, with you, I'm going to renew my pact that I made with Abraham. And you're going to worship me, and in turn, I'll protect you, and I'll take you to this land. This I promise you. And then Abraham goes and says, God has promised us a new homeland. And then thousands of years later, it's written down that God has given the Israelites the promised land. But you see, it's all about how you word everything. Because he is promising to them this land. He is promising to them that he would give them this area. But it's not a land promised to them guaranteed by their genes and their genetics and all of that. It may not be. So the way you word and say things is all about how things go. So when you sit there and you read into everything and you listen to it, you have to realize that everything changes. And what's interesting is about another 1,000 years in between, there was Akhenaten, who once again tried to bring a singular religious god, a religious figure into this. And then over time again we have Jesus bringing another singular religious figure. Okay, so that's Western traditions. Well, that's just us though, in the West. What about in the East? Well, happens in the East too. You have beings like the Yellow Emperor bringing one thing. You have beings like Amaterasu being the supreme emperor, empress, and god and deity, and bringing all her retinue along with her. And we worship them as gods, but not as much as the supreme god. And you look at the story of in Hinduism. What is it? I think it's Brahma and Rama are arguing with each other about who is the greatest god, and then they argue and argue and argue, and then boom, Shiva appears and says, no, I am the greatest god, and here is the proof. And then all bow down and worship this singular being of God, Shiva. So you look and you think about it and you realize that there are all these different beings all across the world who go through the same sort of thing over time, over and over again. Even in the North, you have these worshipings of multiple different gods, but there's still one supreme deity. Woden, Odin, forget who the Tuatha De Danann leader person is, but whatever. It's all the same thing. Even the Sumerians have the supreme god of Anu. And so you have multiple different religions all having the same concept of the same sort of being. Over time, these gods are the same gods traveling our earth and our world and our universe throughout time. And we look at it as being these, from our perspective, as being these new concepts. We look at it from being our perspective as being, back in the day we worshipped multiple different deities, and then today we worship one God because, it makes more sense. We're more mentally advanced. And that's how people say it, because, it's silly that you worship hundreds of thousands of different gods. You hear people say, well, but it's the same thing over time. If you look at time throughout the universe, we've always gone through multiple periods of worshiping singular gods, monotheistic gods, singular gods, monotheistic gods, singular gods, monotheistic gods. For example, one of the oldest religions on the planet is snake worship, where you worship the singular being as a serpent. And then all these other beings around it were also serpents, and they were also gods. So, and then you also go to the story of, even before that, they have sun worship too, where sun worship is is you view the sun as being the all-giving life creator and all things that should be worshipped and give everything, but then there's also these other beings that give you the sun's messages and all of that. So it goes back to the concept of they're all extraterrestrials because they are one guy, they're speaking about one God. Think about a priest, right? You go into a church, right? The guy up top is one guy speaking about one omnipotent God, right? And you're speaking about the God, the all creator, but that priest there, he's not alone up on the stage. He's got little helpers, he's got a deacon, and then there's higher up people than him. There's a bishop, there's all these different things. So the preacher isn't the only guy in the story. So if I went and told somebody who didn't understand Christianity and a Catholic church, and I went into the church and I said, hey, this being came and told me about this one singular God and all this, and then he was talking to Bill, and Bill said, oh yeah, and then God said this, and then wait. So I just, in that scenario, in that little babble of words there, I just mentioned that there's one guy talking about another guy who's the supreme God, and then he's talking to his other buddies. And who are these other buddies? Well, they're not human beings, so who are they? They're extraterrestrials. Even if they're real angels who worship the real God, because they don't exist naturally from this planet, they are by definition extraterrestrials. It's the same thing if we went to another planet. If I go to Mars and there's Martians there and they look at me, I'm not going to say, oh, you aliens. They're going to say, what do you mean, us aliens? You're the alien. This is our planet. And it's all perspective and concept. So if there are these beings who travel through the universe and travel through time, we both know that time travel would be inherent because of the distance you would need to get to two places. You're not going to leave your home planet and get here at the 1 millisecond later on Earth. It's not going to happen, because unless you had some sort of instant portal or something that could do something like that. But if I were to get into a spaceship and do it, it may be 10 years, it may be 100 years, it may be 1,000 years. Eventually I'll get here, but there will have been a distance involved, and that distance is measured by time. And so so time is inherent in space travel because we measure it. But it's not a rule, because if I come to this planet, my different forms, and I come from a different planet, the gravity on that planet is different, the rotation speed is different, the revolution around its star is different, how many planets it interacts with is different, its planetary wobble is different, its force of gravity is different, everything is different, so its concept of time is all different. So I may even have developed technology that could get me here, right, from one planet to another instantaneously or 1 second later, but because of different concepts of time and the planet, I'm really getting there, 1,000 years later or 1,000 years before. And so I may go and come back and all the while think, hey, I'll be back in, 20 minutes or whatever. And meanwhile, it's 2,000 years later. But these beings are all more advanced than you. They have the ability to travel through the stars when we human beings were only still walking on our feet. Barely even had the wheel, barely had a chariot, barely were able to tame horses, all these different things. And you you look and you see, you go, oh, they're so much more advanced than us. They have all these different things. They must be gods. They must be divine. But they're really extraterrestrials. Just because they look similar, they may even look similar to us. It may even be that, you know, 2 arms and 2 legs on a planet is what most life naturally evolves to eventually. You know, it may be that, you know, that's why we used to have, that's why we used to be hunched over with our monkeys and have longer arms and walk on, you know, only slightly 2 feet and hobble. And now that we're you know, thousands of years genetically more advanced, we walk straighter up. Our spine is a little straighter. Our muscles are a little freer at the limbs, you know, so we can make these grips that are better than the monkeys can grip things. So, you know, it's times have changed. So what would, if these beings were human beings from the future, what would they look like? Well, depending on what happens with the planet, it might be that these beings may, in the future, grow taller. Maybe something happens with the sun, and it's hotter on the planet most of the year round, and you know, we're exposed to sun, so we get maybe we get darker skin and higher, taller, or maybe the oxygen and different things change on the planet. So maybe our skin, because we're exposed to the sun more often or whatever, our skin gets like a naturally blue tint. And we're taller, and so because we're taller, our arms are longer, and maybe trees go taller, so my arms over thousands of years have grown really long so I could reach something and pick the tree, the apple off the tree, and maybe all of that. And maybe that's exactly what it is, and maybe this is why we have stories of extraterrestrial gods coming here who are 9, 10 feet tall and blue skinned. And they say, no, 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 we're not gods, we're just like you. Well, you can't be just like me. You look nothing like me besides the fact that you have 2 arms and 2 legs and eyes, nose, and a mouth, and a head. I mean, you look, oh, there we go, cracking my neck. You look nothing like us. Well, how could it be? Well, if you were in the future and something changed on the world and you came back, they might look like us. Just a little different, more advanced. Maybe they needed to live through the trees because there were some serpents or something that grew huge or whatever. You know, who knows? The water, they lived in trees because they needed higher elevation because of, you know, the earth had a problem and there was a lot of cataclysms and storms and stuff. And so we live in higher elevations and trees now so that we can, you know, stay away from the flooding when the more frequent storms come in the future. And so because we live higher up in the trees, our arms grew a little longer, and you know, and then because we're exposed to more sun, our skin got tainted like almost like a dark blue color, and this is why we're taller and blue. I mean, at this point, I started out at the beginning of the episode saying this is all speculation. All our concepts today are going to be all speculation based on some of the evidence we do actually see out in the universe and out in time and in history. And this may be the case. For example, this may be why we see different craft traveling through the thing. It may not just be different extraterrestrial civilizations. It may be our own craft from the future, and what we're seeing is different ways that we and different technologies that we've learned over time. for example, it could be why Constantine, before his great battle, saw a flaming cross in the sky. Maybe he saw one of those fighter jets that got lost in the portal that opened up in front of them in the Bermuda Triangle, and the guy pops out of a portal which looks like a cloud to Constantine, and the wings and the pointed end, it looks like a cross, and there's fire coming out of the back because he's rip roaring through the skies at 400 miles per hour per second, whatever, and so all he sees is this cross-shaped objects with flames shooting out the back. And so he says, "Oh, Jesus, this is a sign of Jesus, of the Holy Cross." Meanwhile, he doesn't understand that he's witnessing technology that's traveling through time. And then later on, we have these different, cigar-shaped craft, and then we have these rounded craft, and then we have both. And then over time, and then even in the beginning, for example, the Egyptians and the Greeks and everything all worshipped a Ben stone. And it looks like a pyramid. And so what's funny is that I think it was 2010 that a UFO video surfaced that looks like a giant pyramid floating through the sky. And what's interesting is you could see the jets burning on the bottom. You could see the energy coming out being used for the energy to create, the thrust. And so, so you look at these different evidences over, which is exactly what the Hindus and the Egyptians and the Greeks all worshipped as back in the day, is these Ben stones that landed here. They said the first gods landed in a Ben stone. Well, what if there was a time-traveling society and they created a pyramid-shaped object, and it, traveled through time and looks like a pyramid, and they called it a Ben, and they landed and came out and talked to people. And then thousands of years later, they have different time-traveling beings, and one of them slipped through a portal or a dimension or some sort of thing and flew out, and they opened out of the other side, and it was no longer the year 2000 whatever, but it was the year 312 AD. And Constantine was on the ground looking up, and you said, "Oh shit, I was just flying over this area, dropping, fighting another plane that was the enemy plane from this battle we're fighting. And then I look down and there's no more planes, and everybody's got swords and cannon fire on the ground. What the fuck?" And then they're all looking at me, and they see my craft and they see my flames, and they say, "Oh shit, it's a cross." But it's just misunderstood technology. It's just misunderstood. So, but now let's travel into another concept, because I realize that we're getting, there's only like a half hour left in the show. Let's turn into another concept real quick. What if, because we talked about in many of our episodes, we talked about how, by inherently traveling through time is different for beings both on their own planet in their measurement of time, as well as the distance between the two objects and how those two objects measure time, the perspective, and then how those two line up. So like I said, just because society might have started, 10,000 years ago on their planet, might have been a million years ago on our planet, and so they seem a million or so years more advanced than us when they're only 10,000 years more advanced than us. And then it takes them another 1,000 years to get here. So then it's 11,000 years more advanced than us. And then they would make technological improvements over that time before they even got here. I mean, it would be a whole different thing. But what if there was a society whose whole mission was to travel through time and adjust the course of events based on their perspective and their time frame and how they want things to go? What if there was that type of society or a person or a being? And they kept traveling through, man, I got a WD-40 this chair or something. They keep traveling through time, and they go to different worlds because maybe they want to learn. Maybe they first started by doing it and they wanted to learn about different historical events. Maybe they do multiple different things. One of the things they do is they study history and time and all of that. And so they get in their craft and they observe. They take scientific samples. They, take some people and interview them. They do some experiments on them and other beings, and then they learn about it, and then they go on their way, maybe to another time frame, and maybe they do that. Yes, maybe they go and they look and they say, oh, trying to figure out how to word this next part. Maybe they go and they look at these societies and they see something going on that they think that they can fix, and they say, oh, I can fix that. Let me do, this, and then they interact with the people. This may be the stories that we have of visitation and them coming down and them doing all these things and giving us knowledge and all that, because they have the ability to choose whether or not they want to interact with us. And then when they interact with us, they impart the knowledge that, hey, there's only one God. Hey, there's, this is how you cook your food properly. Hey, this is how, you hunt and make weapons, and this is how you, farm and make fire and do all these things, and sip of water. And do all these things, and you do them, and then you leave again and go about your way. And each time you come back, each time frame you come back, you keep interacting with people the more and more you do it, until you see something is happening. And it's so interesting because we see things like that all the time. For, like I just mentioned earlier in a few of my theoretical scenarios, we see these events happening over time and a cycle. We go through different beliefs, and then we go back to old beliefs or revamping old beliefs, and we go we go to we go through cycles. For example, in religion, we go from one God, multi-God, multi-gods, one God, multi-gods, one God, one God, multi-gods, over and over and over again, through different cycles and through different religions and geographical locations on the planet. Over time, it almost seems like we stray on our own way in whatever we believe over time, and then somebody comes back and keeps giving us a nudge. Could this be the time travelers? Could this be the real God or gods who come from the future or come from their planet, which may be the future to us? It may be that they, because of the time differences, and it may be that the future, these beings could be quote coming from the future and nudging us, could be doing all of these different concepts, probably multiple of these different concepts, because we have we look at, we see all these different things going on. We see genetic experiments. We see laboratory science experiments. We see climates and viruses and different objects in the sky and interactions with people. And so what you think about is you get a concept of a world where anything is possible. All of these people are all entirely, could be real and could be possibly attempting to control things and travel through time. Whether they're purposely traveling through time on it is another concept. And we kind of explored a few of them today. We talk about a lot of topics. I'm looking at something because there was something I wanted to. Oh, yeah. And so that's what it was. So this ties into the realm of the ancient beliefs of the Watchers, because if you were a society that was either coming from the future or coming from another planet, or both, or a dimension, or both, you would realize that this is exactly what was happening. You're highly intelligent, you're all advanced, you have all these things. You would realize that this cycle of monotheism, polytheism, strong society, weak society, hunter-gatherers to civilizations, to hunter-gatherers to civilizations, over that we see as evidence throughout the geological and archaeological record over time. You would think of these concepts and you would see them from your own perspective, and you would say, we need to do something about it, right? So what would you do? Well, you say, well, I can't stay here all day long and live here forever. I got things to do. I got to go to other planets. I got to go get my own breakfast. I got to do all these different things. I got these lab experiments I'm doing. So, it's a combination of different things, and you look at all these different things and you say, well, I can't be the one, but obviously I realize the need for having somebody be here all the time to watch over everything, right? So what do they develop? Well, they develop the concept of the Watchers. And so they take a few of their guys, let's say Bill, Jill, and Mike from our earlier scenario, right? And then a few other guys, and they say, all right, listen, you guys, you're all smart, skilled in your own speciality. You got your own things that you do. So we're going to put you in charge, and you're going to watch over this science experiment here, on this planet. And they're like, all right, no problem. And a few thousand years goes by, everything's good, and then then they say, well, we're doing what we're supposed to do. We do our experiments. We give them little nudges, and then bam, they start to worship polytheism already. They're worshiping all these other gods, even calling us gods. And then a couple of them say, why don't we just be gods? Why don't we just be gods and let them worship us? Fuck it. Why not? And so, then these beings come back from their world, and they say, dude, what the fuck? You were supposed to just watch over these people, not command them to worship you. Well, what's wrong with you? So they have this whole battle, right? And they have this whole battle, and in Greek they call it the Titanomachy, and where the gods fought against the old gods, the Titans, and the new gods, and then they go and they rule over. But what we forget about is there's another battle where the old gods come back and fight the new gods again, and this time the new gods lose. And this may be why we don't have any polytheistic gods physically in place here anymore. It may even be why we don't have any, or rarely any, religious encounters anymore. For in the old world, they had people visiting them all the time. This is exactly why Lot knew that these beings were, that he ran up to and said, my lords, and worshiped them immediately and bowed down to them and knew that they were divine angels. Because this was commonplace in the world. It has nothing to do with the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. This was commonplace in the world to have interaction with these angelic beings, these divine beings, these watcher beings. It was common. All over the world it happened, everywhere. And so you would look at it and he would see these beings and he says, oh, my lords, please, I am your humble servant. How may I help you? And they would say, you can definitely help us. I'm so glad you worship us and not these other beings. We're going to save you and your family, and nobody else. And that's exactly what happens. And then they go on their own way, and then they see the whole city being destroyed. And, these beings then they do all their things. They take over, they take control, and they interact. And then they they have all these, so it was commonplace in their time. Now it's not so commonplace. In fact, you would be sooner to think that a person is insane and crazy than that they had been talking to a god or the god. You would sooner say that that person is insane than believe that they were talking to God. And yet, if you read all these ancient things that happened in the past, started off because somebody said, hey, I was talking to God, and God said do this, and they say, oh, okay, God said do that, we must do it. And today, from our perspective, we think, well, they're a bunch of religious fanatic idiots because that's what they thought in the time. But what if that wasn't exactly what they thought at the time? It was because they believed those things, because they had proof, because these other gods and these other beings and these other deities were real here on the earth. And it was the same thing. So it was commonplace. So after these beings then had another war and were destroyed and left, the original ones came and said, well, we can't do this anymore. We can't do this interaction like we used to. We have to have a new sort of interaction, a new sort of things. We also can't stay here on this planet. We can't stay here and do things because if we stay here on this planet, then we're gonna miss our other thing, miss our home world, do all this. We have other tasks to do, so we need to create a new Watcher race. So we create these semi-robotic biological beings that are able to, um, you know, manipulate themselves and recreate themselves and program themselves and clone themselves. And these robots are awesome, but then they have a problem because now they need to interact with us because in order to clone more versions of themselves, they need biogenetic material. And so, in order to get that genetic material, they need to go down to the world and perform scientific experiments and all these other things. So, you're getting these multiple concepts come across and combine with each other. But when you combine the ideas and put them together like that, it actually kind of makes sense because you realize that just like how you can't be everywhere at once and do all the same things at once, neither can all these other beings, neither can these extraterrestrials, neither can anything or anyone. You have to do all the different things. You would have to do multiple different concepts of things in order to achieve your goal as a society. Their goal, not our goals, their goals. The gods or the extraterrestrials, they would want to do things in their time frame, in their mind, in their perspective, for their benefit. It has nothing to do with our benefit. Now, that scenario that I made up in the beginning was actually not a scenario made up in the beginning. I really did watch the show a few weeks or a month ago, and then I watched the news right after, and I really did have all these different concepts about it. I really did also have that imagination that I now call a vision, because we are really seeing a lot of those ideas left in the world. Currently going in the world, I should say. Not left in the world, currently going in the world, I should say. So the way it is it could be me. The point is that it could be me. It could be me coming from the future to do whatever my plans are. And I got a lot of plans. And if it really was me doing these plans in the future, it's definitely not going to be for your benefit. It may be for all mankind's benefit. It doesn't mean that a bunch of people wouldn't die. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be a bunch of heartache and hardships. In fact, it would be the same for the extraterrestrials, even if it wasn't me, because it's from their perspective. Just like how you have the story of the Great Flood. In all religions and all cultures across the planet, every single one talks about the Great Flood. And they say the God sent it. And the God sent it from their perspective. And from their perspective, the flood was awesome. Flood was awesome. It got rid of all these wacko creatures. It killed all of them. Wiped everything out. They were able to start their experiment over again. It wasn't a runaway thing anymore. The flood was awesome. But for us humans, or any being living here on the earth, the flood was terrible. It was horrible. It destroyed billions and millions of people and almost any trace of any ancient civilization that could have existed before the flood. I mean, it was terrible, and so it could be all these different things, you don't know. Until we know, we don't know, and it's all just concept. But we can point to things that are evidence, and we could say, this is the evidence and this is why and this is it, and so and this is what we're trying to do here is we're trying to find all the evidence, believe it, and then put it together in a timeline so where we can figure out the absolute truth for everything. I want to thank everybody for joining me on this wonderful, wonderful day. This whole week and month and year is fantastic so far. I am having a wonderful time. Don't forget to follow on X for all updated notifications for the show. We'll see you on Thursday for games. We'll see you on next Saturday for the podcast. WARRmultiverse.com. We're getting closer to the first novel being finished. So if you want to hear more about that, please check it out on WARRmultiverse.com and go to the descriptions and everything, and you'll read all about the stories that we're working on. If you like the show and missed any part of the episode, you can follow on all podcasting platforms on everywhere that you get a podcast. And I hope you have a wonderful day, y'all. Let's be good. Peace out.
Lace my Tim's, metaverse in sight, parallel dimensions. Gonna grind all night, flip realities, stack 'em high, skyscrapers, universe, shuffle sets, bro, no capers. Lurk spreads like rumors in back alleys, productivity floods, tsunami in the valleys.